Every day is a hectic day, and many of us, including myself, do not have the time to look around and wonder about the things that surround us. We act like our physical environment is not important to us. We look into our phones and computers. Yeah, all the information we will ever need is inside a small screen. We can talk to our friends and family through our little devices. How efficient and how convenient. I hate to say it, but now my vinyls seem almost comical. Such an ancient technology of the past. And I love how tactile it is. In the old days, these were made with physical sound that are recorded into a phonographing machine, and the sound physically engraved onto circular wax. Then this original vinyl was used to pressing other wax into vinyl that are then packaged into a cardboard sleeve, then to a record store, and guy wandering in the store trying to figure out which one to take home, discovering other new artists too. Then the vinyl was brought home to share the music with friends. So vinyl is embedded with physical memory of the music manufacturing and consumers' experience of acquiring it. I got mine from a record store down in Squirrel Hill, the store called Jerry's Records. Everyone should visit someday. The store is amazing. I still remember taking the bus to Squirrel Hill and walking through the aisle with my friend to pick up this Stevie Wonder, and came home to listen to it with him. And today, look how easy it is to listen to music. I can easily access millions of music stored somewhere in a cloud storage facility. Just like that. It almost seems like the music as a form has evolved into something that will not wither, ever. Because it's somewhere in the clouds. But who the artist was, what the melody sounds like, I will probably forget in a couple days. So sadly, every music I listen to today feels almost insignificant. Efficiency is one of the most important values in our society today. We optimize things and make our lives as convenient as possible. But this tendency to move towards efficiency and convenience sometimes makes certain culture disappear, like how the culture of buying physical albums of music disappeared. I remember when I was little, my great-grandmother's house had a very high threshold below the front door. This is called 문지방. And this 문지방 was at the entrance of every room too. As a little kid, I tripped over these thresholds sometimes because I could not lift my feet high enough. And in the far past, these thresholds were even higher. And although these thresholds had practical purpose of preventing water and insects from crawling indoors, like how they are normally used in the Western cultures, the height of a threshold implied the significance of the building or the owner of the building. So royal palaces had the highest 문지방. Some scholars had moderately high 문지방. Some ordinary households had low 문지방 too. But even when Korea westernized and modernized, people kept making this threshold, despite the absence of social hierarchy. The kind of inconvenience of lifting one's feet up, almost hopping into a building, created the sense of entering a different world, so that a home could become one's own world. There were cultural myths about stepping on a threshold, bringing bad luck, because the threshold was considered a sacred boundary between the world and the house. Over time, 문지방 got lower and smaller and finally disappeared, because people wanted to walk into a building and their rooms without any hindrance. In the society where convenience and efficiency is of greatest virtue, 문지방 was destined to disappear. Maybe this is a good thing, and maybe not. But we must remember that making the user experience as smooth and convenient as possible may result in a disappearance of architectural elements that have cultural implications. Too often our world lacks the tenderness and sensitivity when treating social cultural elements, while the physical manifestation of the idea of newness, convenience, and efficiency can sometimes result in the loss of cultural and societal networks. The construction of Chunggye is another great example of this. Chunggye is a narrow stream that crosses the old city center of Seoul. People did laundries and dishes here, and the water was really dirty, almost like a sewage. In the mid-20th century, the government filled the stream with cement to use it as a road, as this was the time when Korea was rapidly industrializing. And on top of this road emerged a large manufacturing district. Many manufacturing factories took over the old Korean houses in this area. These buildings used to have a measuring unit of kan, which refers to the space inside the grid column. And each of these kan became space for individuals to bring in some kind of machinery for manufacturing. One guy would have a store of spring, one guy wires, metal casting, etc. Over time, these individual businesses began to create a highly intricate network. Say if one wants to make a prototype of wall clock, he could simply walk into a store, glass manufacturer, and the glass manufacturer will connect him to other manufacturers needed to make that wall clock. In the early 2000s, the stream was restored, the cement was dug up and roads were removed. The city wanted to turn it into an urban park. So many of the small factories along the stream were evicted. But removing the parts of the network eventually affected the entire system, because they relied on each other for commissions. Soon many factories that were not evicted closed down too, even though they were not near the stream. People really enjoyed their new urban park. I have been there too and it's quite nice. But it is important to know that these urban projects that seem solely physical can have a long-lasting effect on social network, because manufacturers are still living this district today. Sometimes old and inconvenient things are okay, and we can still love them if we properly care for them, like people did for Sewoon Arcade. Sewoon Arcade is a building in the center of Seoul, built in 1966. It is a 3/4 miles long building complex with 4 segments. The building had apartments on the upper levels, and on the ground level there were retail and manufacturing. When it was first built, people praised the building because it was the most advanced building type that Korea has ever seen. Great plumbing systems, access to electricity, and elevators. And this was a good place for manufacturing and small factories because of the infrastructure around. But soon residents started to dislike the building. It was too noisy and dusty because they were basically living above factories. And by this time, Korean economy was growing rapidly and Seoul expanded quickly too. Gangnam was rising as a new residential area. There were newer and better apartments. So many residents started to leave their apartments. The vacant spaces in the building slumized. Illegal businesses emerged and the building was considered dangerous. In the early 2000s, a short segment of a building was demolished and turned into a park. Bridges between the segments were removed too. And a large segment was sold to a real estate company that renovated the building into a hotel. It seemed as if the rest of the building was going to be demolished entirely. But many small factories and electronics stores remained in the building, which became a foundation for tech startups and university laboratories to emerge. In the recent decade, these startups and labs relating to emerging technologies in 3D printing, drones, and AI started to inhabit the residential quarter of the building, which brought a lot of young generation into the building. Today, the building is treasured in Seoul as a historical landmark. A rooftop garden was made and the bridges were reconstructed to connect the buildings. And many cafes and restaurants opened along the elevated walkways. The city even made a small museum about the history of Sewoon Arcade. I love this building because it is one of the few urban-scale projects in Seoul that contains the memory of the city during the modernization of Korea. Seoul has demolished enough and built enough new things. And with Sewoon Arcade, we have learned to take pride in and celebrate the memory of the city. The celebration of memories was also important to the artists of the Arte Povera movement. The movement began in the 1960s in Italy. The artists of the movement attacked the pre-established artistic values of government, industry, and culture. Conventionally, an art had to be prestigious, robust, and permanent in order to be considered significant. And art often represented social ideals that seemed everlasting. But the artists of this movement decided to use mundane and simple materials to show the transformative nature of life. They claim that daily and mundane objects that are subject to weathering can be celebrated. Michelangelo Pistoletto is one of the more renowned artists of this movement. Interestingly, he started his art career restoring and conserving murals and paintings in his father's workshop. This is one of his famous works called The Metamorphosis. The installation is made of white garments and colorful used uniforms and clothing. And here, Pistoletto allows the viewers to see that there are memories beyond just the appearance of these colorful clothing. We are so used to designing things that seem so permanent, despite all materials have their own lifespan. When I first saw the Washington Monument, I was amazed by its scale and its bold geometry, but I couldn't tell what it was celebrating. Only later I found out that the monument was built to celebrate the independence of the United States and to commemorate George Washington, the first president of the United States. But I found it hard to relate the monument and what it was celebrating, so I imagined a possible alternative to the monument. A monument that only retains the shape as a framework, and a surface where people can hang objects from their daily lives. Clothes, mugs, doors, bicycles, any objects from their daily lives. These will weather over time and disappear someday. Then the next generation can place their objects to celebrate their lives in the United States. From the beginning of the semester, I have been pondering on the subject of weathering. And a couple weeks ago, I've concluded that weathering is a process of taming materials. That materials weather through their relationship with natural environment, people, and surrounding materials. However, I have come to notice that I am also tamed by the things that I tame too. And maybe I love things that weather because they embrace memories, and they're ephemeral and mortal, just like me. Ideas and materials comes and goes. And when we need to make a decision as a society, on what to keep and what to abandon, we should be thoughtful about the outcome of these decisions. Because these decisions are the foundation upon which the future generation will build their society.